Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations. Hello, welcome back to the How I See It podcast. If you're tuning in for the first time, we are so happy to have you. If you've been around a little bit, we'd love for you to show your support for this podcast through doing things like recommending us on your social networks. This could be as simple as just, share one of the episodes you really enjoyed. It's helpful when you like our social media posts, share those, and especially when you subscribe to the podcast through whatever podcast or music playing service that you use. You might be surprised to know that when you do these things, this is what they call engagement. And these algorithms really care about this stuff. So when you show that you care about what we're producing here, it's more likely that the various social networks will promote what we're doing and share it because there's engagement there. So we love it when you support us in that way. Last week, we shared with you the first part of our chat with Judge Disbrow. And we've heard so much great feedback on that episode. We're really happy to share with you today the continuation of this interview where the conversation veers in a more personal direction. So we hope you enjoy.
And I think it's a good thing that the most you can get is 20 days for failing to pay a fine, as opposed to you're driving with your license revoked because you've been convicted of driving while impaired. There should be different levels of punishment, and those should be different misdemeanors. So the legislature made that change. Another change the legislature made. Possession of marijuana, possession of marijuana paraphernalia, possession of drug paraphernalia, depending on the paraphernalia, was a class 1 misdemeanor. Anything used to be a class 1 misdemeanor.
Yeah.
Now, possession of marijuana paraphernalia is a class 3 misdemeanor.
Sure.
A lower level, again, lower punishment.
Yeah.
Possession of marijuana is a class 3 misdemeanor. Depending on the amount. So there's a move across the nation to legalize marijuana altogether, and with medical marijuana being legal in many, many states, and will probably be legal in North Carolina at some point.
Wow.
The legislature they're taking these steps, I think, to almost get them to the point of civil penalties, where as opposed to making it criminal, you pay a $50 civil penalty. And that's not what it is currently, but we seem to be moving towards that in North Carolina and in many other states across the country, where it's not only is it not criminal, but there's no civil penalty as well.
Right.
And that, I'm not implying that I agree with that philosophy, but I certainly understand that philosophy from a legislative perspective.
Yeah. Also, fighting the tide seems like a losing battle in many ways. Fiscally, for instance, I mean, the amount of, just generally speaking, right? That's one of the complaints against the war on drugs, right? Is like how much resources we put into that. And so the idea that marijuana is legalizing, across the country, and we're trying to keep this, I mean, that seems pretty irresponsible. To try and hold that line. That's just my armchair how I see it.
Sure.
But,
yeah. No, I think a lot of folks see it that same way, Justin, which I think this is somewhat of the compromise that our legislature has made with it thus far. And like I said, I think you'll see further compromise. And,
that is a tremendous change that's basically occurred within the past
within
3 years.
Within the past decade for sure, of decreasing the criminal aspect of that. And there's
specifically marijuana.
Yes.
More so than
yes. And then I'll give you one more area that comes to mind of what I think is significant change in North Carolina are expungements.
Okay.
An expungement it's basically wiping your record clean.
Okay.
When I first started practicing law back in 1998, it was very limited what you could expunge.
What decided? I mean, as far as those limitations,
the law, the legislature decided these type of cases you can expunge from your record. very few felonies could be expunged.
Okay.
It was mainly misdemeanors. A lot of times there were age limitations that you had to be convicted between, 18 and 21, depending on the crime again. That has been expanded.
Wow.
Significantly, tenfold, where now you can expunge non-violent felonies after 10 years.
Wow. Okay.
Some of them are, 15-year wait. Significant felonies.
Okay.
And
But you said non-violent.
Correct. Non-violent. The violent felonies.
Things
you're going to have a hard time getting armed robbery.
Yeah. That's what I was.
Drug trafficking, things like that are not going to be expunged. But this type of this wave of change that I've seen from the legal perspective that comes from our legislature, and really is again a push across the country, I think it shows grace on our part as people.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what's your take on that? How do you see that? Like,
I think it's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
We all make mistakes, and I realize we all don't make mistakes that necessarily violate the law, but I think it's shameful for us as a country if a 24-year-old kid, because they're still a kid in my eyes, does something stupid and is convicted of possession of cocaine, possession of marijuana, whatever it is, name your felony, and they have that scarlet letter for the rest of their life. I see a lot of good people in the courtroom who come before me, and I know that may shock a lot of people. They're good people who are struggling with addiction, who are in this position because they've gone through a horrible divorce and they just fell apart, who didn't have a dad in their house since they were 6 years old and haven't had any guidance, or didn't have a mother around, have been hanging out with the wrong crowd for the past few years. Those people, we all deserve a chance to show that we can get this thing right. And all crimes are not created equal. We all come from different environments, and I think it's important that we remember grace and we remember that. I think we're a country of second chances, and I think that we have a justice system that is a justice system of second chances. I mean, most people are put on probation. To me, that's giving you a second chance to get it right. So,
demonstrating your willingness to want to change.
That's right. That's right. I mean, it doesn't mean you don't get punished.
Sure. Right.
But it means the punishment is not what it could be, because we're going to give you an opportunity to get this thing straightened out. For instance, someone comes in and they're in a relationship and they commit domestic violence against their wife. Now that's tough for me, because I was brought up, you'd never put your hands on a female, period. Doesn't matter what they do to you. They kick you in the privates, you take it and you move on. That's how I was taught. So I've got some bias towards that. And I recognize that I've got an implicit bias, so I have to check myself. But, oftentimes we order folks, we give them a suspended sentence for this assault, if it's their first offense.
Sure.
We order them into what's called a domestic violence offender program that is 26 weeks. It's pretty expensive. I think it's $1,000 for somebody to pay. So they go through,
of their personal money.
1 hour a week. They go to this class and they learn about, domestic violence and how to, control your temper. I'll leave that to the expert, Mark, the counselor, but they learn tools in order to deal with that. And we give them community service to do, as opposed to putting them in jail for 30 days and saying, okay, you're done with your sentence. Because at the end of the day, I'm not sure that really fixes anything.
Right.
Sure.
If we haven't given them any tools to maybe prevent this behavior in the future, then have I really done my job as a judge to help this community, make this community better? Now, look, if the individual is put on probation, refuses to go to the domestic violence offender program classes, doesn't do his community service, and picks up a new charge, he's going to prison.
Yeah.
We're going to activate his sentence. He'll go to prison because he's refused to do his probation. But that's on him.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
not
he's been given the opportunity.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. You can extend grace if they don't.
Yeah.
If they don't appreciate and take advantage of that grace, well, okay, that's something that they have to deal with. That's not really an issue that I have to deal with.
That's like what I tell my kids, like, you're choosing your consequence.
That's right.
I tell you up front what'll happen if you do the thing. Yeah. If you do the thing, you choose that consequence. Yeah. That's your choice. That's okay. Right. You chose it. And at that point, yeah.
But it's interesting that and I think that's part of the polarization to a certain degree. It's like, by implementing consequences, you're the mean dad. You know what I'm saying? Sure. In our culture, in our world, it's like, well, that's just being mean. Because I just want continued grace, right. And overlook it, whether it's an expungement or whatever. I'm not saying that that's wrong. Don't get me wrong. But it's interesting that in that mindset, and I think that's a part of it. It's like, I don't really want the law in my life until somebody offends me.
Sure.
Then I want the law in my life because I want justice.
That's exactly right.
And I think, how often that translates into how polarizing the law can become. Because it's interesting, you and I know of each other. I've been in your courtroom before,
because your attitude?
Yeah, I forgot. No, but I would have clients or, that would, and it's interesting because, I would routinely hear, well, that Judge Disbrow, he was connected with this person and he's just in that person's pocket.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And it was always an interesting role for me because it's like,
actually, he's.
Yeah, that's probably not true. Yeah. But, and I think how often those kind of dynamics, and it leads to that ignorance that you're talking about, because, it's like my view of me getting in trouble is you. And I'm even mindful of how not equating you to God, but yet from a spiritual dynamic, I can see a correlation, how God extends grace
absolutely
through Jesus, but yet at the same time, there is a way. It's kind of neat to think about that when we're talking about our desire to extend grace, but yet we got to recognize there's a way that occurs. And I think it's neat when you think about our forefathers and legislation that we live in this country that we do and have this opportunity to talk about these things like this. Mm-hmm. And how that models, or, and I think if I may say, your heart is to emulate that grace, that compassion.
Well, I appreciate that. I think at times maybe judges can be scared to use the word grace and mercy, but my philosophy, do what is right, love mercy, be humble.
Sure.
That carries over. That should absolutely carry over into my role as a judge. Sure. I tell people, mercy is a big word.
Sure.
Sometimes the most merciful thing I can do for somebody, and I do it, is put them in prison.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is send them to a rehab facility for 90 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is to not give them a bond or to give them a very high bond. I preside over our treatment courts.
Sure.
When a young person comes in and tests positive for fentanyl, I generally will put them in jail, not because I'm punishing them, because I'm trying to save their life.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most merciful thing I can do for a 19-year-old boy who is addicted.
Yep. And his mom can actually sleep.
That is exactly right.
Because she knows her son is actually safe.
That's right.
And she's not waiting on that phone call from the police to say, we found your son.
I'm okay with that boy hating me for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
I can lay my head down just fine at night.
Yeah.
Because for those 4 or 5 days where he's drying out, we're in the background finding an inpatient facility for him to get the help that he needs, that he doesn't think he needs,
right
to
now.
give him some better tools
Mm-hmm.
to maybe have a life where he's living clean and sober.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think, these treatment courts, we haven't talked much about that, but those being around these participants, seeing how they struggle, and the reason they're struggling is because of one thing: addiction.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What most people, going back to the ignorance, what most people don't understand about court, the justice system, most people who come before me, and it's a high percentage, 60, 70, 80%, it's because of drugs and or alcohol.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the reality.
Yeah.
Sober people don't do as much dumb stuff,
Right.
in quotation marks,
Impaired
as
stuff,
people
right?
as people who are impaired. And from my own perspective, some of the stupidest stuff I have done is when I had too much to drink in my life.
Sure.
My younger days. And I think many men would say the same thing, and women would say the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you're dealing with more significant addictions, not that alcohol is not significant, but when you're dealing with an opiate addiction, that's when individuals they're chasing their next high.
Yeah.
They're breaking into a house, not because they need a television to watch.
Right.
They're breaking into a house. They're not trying to harm anybody. They need some money to get their fix. They're hanging out with people who are addicts. Bad things happen when we hang out with people who are addicts. We also use drugs when we're hanging out with addicts, or we go along for the ride with the person who's going to buy the drugs, and we're then charged with possession of the cocaine or possession of the Schedule III controlled substance, whatever it is that the individual purchased in the car with us. So if we try to treat the root of the problem, maybe we do get somewhere. Maybe we actually fix the problem, at least for that person. And that's why these treatment courts are so important, and not just treatment courts. That's why probation can be really important.
Sure.
If you can hook these folks up with the right resources, you can change the trajectory of their life.
No doubt.
Absolutely.
2-degree change today is tremendous down the road.
And it's not just, and this is what I talk about in the community. We're not just changing that person's life.
Sure.
That's great in and of itself, I think.
Worth it.
Changing one person's life is fantastic. But if let's say that you've got a defendant who's been suffering from addiction for 25 years, been in and out of his children's lives, 2 or 3 wives, mom and dad, dad's probably thrown in the towel a long time ago. Mama never leaves usually, because that's just how they're made.
By God's grace.
Correct. Thank goodness. But you change that, you give a tool for that man who's been suffering from addiction for 25 years. Now all of a sudden his life has changed. He's living clean and sober. He's holding the job for the first time in a long time. He's able to pay rent. Now the children that he hasn't seen in a while, they're kind of coming back around. And now mom and dad are kind of coming back around, not as parents that are paying for his bills, but having a regular parent-child relationship.
Sure.
And now all those friends that he used to have, he's got a new set of friends. Right now he's involved in church. Now he's involved in Celebrate Recovery. Now he's involved in AA. And now he's pouring back into the community because he's got the tools, and he sees that, I've done this. And now I want to help this young kid.
I've got something to share.
There is.
And that's what happens. That's what we see with these treatment courts, where these people pour back in. And I know, Justin, you probably, and you guys are both involved in Celebrate Recovery. You guys, I'm sure, see these same stories being told. And I try to tell the graduates
my best friends right now are that guy you just said. And they did the whole story you just described. I mean, in fact, exactly one of them has been in prison. He's been, he's been through all of the junk, and he's now at a point where he's changing, and like you said, all of the families trickling in. He's bringing them to Celebrate Recovery.
Yeah.
For the first time last Friday, 2 of them led a thing.
That's awesome.
And it was just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And it's exactly this. I mean, it's what you're describing.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to see in those individuals when that change occurs, because there is that, if you will, even that self-confidence. In CR, it would be a God confidence,
right?
That it's like being able to say, okay, this is what God has done for me, and that's where I used to be, but here's where I am, and now I'm willing to share.
Right.
Now I have something to give, where it seemed as if I was just an empty hole that needed to be filled. Now I'm a source.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I just, that transformation, that's neat stuff.
And to me, those are the most powerful stories, is when you've got somebody who's been suffering in addiction for decades, and they can stand up in a room and talk to people half their age or more and say, I've been where you are. Heck, I've been worse. Because that's what really helps those folks who, I think anyway, who were stuck in that addiction. That's what gives them hope, right? To know that if that guy can do it, my gosh, I can do it too.
And if a guy like you tells them, hey, you're heading towards this, don't do that, they go, yeah, whatever, white collar, you had it all handed to you, you don't know what it's like. If a guy like them has been in that, right, and say, no, really,
100%,
don't do it.
That's exactly how I feel about it. I haven't been where they are. You know, by the grace of God, I haven't. So that's why I talk to these folks who are graduates, and, you know, sometimes I'll pull them aside. I write little notes to each of them after they graduate, and for the ones who I think are strong public speakers, I urge them, you need to tell your story. You need to share this. You are a resource for younger people, and, you know, that's a gift.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's hard to believe that that's a gift, that 20 years of addiction is a gift, but it's a gift. Now you got to give it back.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because one of our questions was, you know, or I thought it was, what one aspect of your job makes your job the best job in the world?
Oh, wow. I don't know if there's one aspect. I do have the best job in the world. Let me start with that. You know, people thank me all the time. Thanks for what you do. And I say, look, I'm honored to do this job. I would almost do it for free, but I have to take care of my family.
Sure.
Every day is different.
Yeah.
In my role, it's very challenging. You have some challenging legal issues that really make you think, that make you dive deeper into case law and really, you know, read that Constitution and. But the best part of my job is helping people, kind of along those lines of the treatment courts. And it's not always in treatment court, but that's where I see it the most, because I meet with those folks twice a month, and I see them at their worst, and then I get to see them at their best.
Neat. And
seeing that transformation, knowing that you played a very small role, and trust me when I tell you, it's not me trying to be humble. I have a very small role in that courtroom.
Well, it's interesting because your role, it represents a single statement. So it's small in scope, but it's not small. Like, often you're the gatekeeper to that change.
Correct.
So I appreciate what you're saying, because there's a lot of people in, you know, treatment handling that person, working. They're doing the work.
Absolutely.
But I also think it's important not to downplay what your part in it represents. It represents the opportunity, right?
No,
the gate.
You're absolutely correct. You know, I'm the person that if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, they potentially go to prison. So I understand that maybe they're scared at times when they walk into that courtroom. But when I say, you know, I play a small role. There's so many people involved in the treatment courts. Our substance abuse counselors play a huge role. My treatment coordinators that work at the courthouse play an enormous role in constant contact with these folks. Other providers who are involved. Our probation officers play an enormous role. Our surveillance officer, Sam Britt with the sheriff's office, plays a huge role, constant contact with our participants. And then at the end of the day, the participant is the most important player in the court, because they have to do the work.
They have to do the work.
And they have to fight through that addiction. They have to fight through the slips that invariably occur with some of them.
And I think you and I would both agree from both of our perspectives. Well, we're talking about that work is some of the most significant, difficult work that any person can do from any walk of life.
Yep.
Like, it is not just, it's not just a saying doing the work.
Correct.
It is transformational work.
Difficult.
Painful.
Yep.
Often painful. Often. Yeah.
They're told you got to change the people, place, and things. Now, that might be easy for the three of us.
Right.
Might be easy for Justin to say, honey, we got to move. We got to get away from this crowd that we're living on this street.
Yeah.
It's not easy for most people. They don't have the money to do that. So you can't change your place. It's hard to change your friends because you grew up with these people for the last 10, 15, 20 years. Maybe you grew up here and this is just your friend group. And now this judge and my treatment counselors and everybody that I'm around is saying, I have to get new friends. It's tough, right?
Yeah.
And then you got to change the things that led you here, the habits that led you here. Those are really tough things for any of us to do, let alone want to do them.
Sure. In the same environment.
Correct.
That I've grown up in.
Correct.
Yeah.
And those people, places, and things represent a lot. They represent safety.
Right.
They represent trust.
Identity.
They represent family.
That's
identity.
Right. Sure.
Right. So
very often I ask participants to choose sobriety or their family.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because remember, I'm a huge believer, and this is in most of where we are in life. I'm a huge believer you're a product of your environment. Most of us are Christians because we grew up in Christian homes. Most Muslims are Muslim because they grew up in Muslim homes. I mean, you just use religion as an example. I don't think many people would argue that concept, right? Sure. That's just, that's what I was.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of drug addicts grew up in homes with drug addicts.
Right.
A lot of alcoholics grew up in homes with alcoholics.
Sure.
So if you're going to get out of that cycle, a lot of times it requires that boundary of, Mom, you're not allowed to my house anymore. You're not allowed to come over anymore because I'm in a court that I can't be around you because I know what's going to happen if I'm around you. I can't imagine what that would be like. Yeah. But that, unfortunately, is what a lot of times it takes.
Sure. Because I think, when we think about addiction, we'd all recognize there's a root that's underneath that.
Sure.
And so often that root is part of our family tree.
Yeah.
That's given to us by not blaming our parents, but recognizing how that influence is a part of my legacy, if you will.
Right.
I put that in air quotes because it's not necessarily a positive legacy, but it is part of that legacy.
It is.
And to be able to recognize that, I gotta plant some new seeds here to create some of my own roots, because this tree isn't getting me where I want to be. And it's just,
I think too, presiding over these courts, you gain so much perspective as to how somebody could get to this spot. I'll be the first to admit, I used to be that guy who says, just put it down.
Just stop.
What's the problem?
Stop it.
Look, either stop drinking, because I've had periods of time I just stopped drinking in my life. It felt like I was drinking too much and said, I'm not going to drink anymore. Okay, well, I can do it. Why can't you do it? Right? And that's arrogance. And ignorance is what it is.
Ignorance, yeah.
So you gained this perspective, particularly with our female participants. And I'm like, how did we get here? So I started asking questions. sometimes they're through the coordinators because they're very private questions that, probably don't want to share with the public, but some are willing to share. Some of the females are willing to share. When did you start doing drugs? I was 12 years old. Is there anything that triggered that? I was sexually assaulted by my stepfather. I was sexually assaulted by so-and-so. I mean, so many of our female participants, it's from trauma. And
you're asking them to pass through that trauma
without any
help.
Correct.
Whatsoever.
And don't forget, we're dealing with, a lot of times low socioeconomic, not the greatest level of education. And we've been snowballing for years. Some of our women, 30s, 40 years old, 50 years old. They've never gotten counseling for being sexually assaulted. They've been married several times. None of these things are shocking once you start to peel the onion back a little bit. And I guess that's where I get defensive when I hear folks in the community, all these people, you should just put them in jail. Really?
Ignorance.
What I want them to do is come sit in that courtroom. I mean, it'll make you cry. I'm almost tearing up thinking about it, because you want me to throw her in jail because she was raped at 10 years old? Because that's what you're asking me to do. Because she was raped at 10 years old, because that's really how we got here now. I'm not saying she shouldn't be punished. And
right.
A lot of times she's been punishing herself for 25 years. I'm trying to give her a chance.
But also punishment, correctly done, is meant to help.
Correct.
And so when you punish that girl, it's because you're saying, you will never get what you need to get this way, the way you're going, ever.
Right.
There's only one way that you even have a chance, and that's through punishment. That's through a correction of behavior, right?
Correct, yeah.
And that's true of, like, my kids. That's true of any of us. Like, when we get stuck in our junk, like, punishment is not meant to just be a placeholder, right? A place to shove someone to say, this is where you are now. Punishment is meant to get us to the other side, right? Yeah. Does that?
It is, absolutely. Done correctly.
Done correctly, yes. That's...
And I think people lose sight too. I'm not talking about the murderers and the rapists. Those people need to be punished. They need to be. That's what our prisons are for. Are people who are dangerous to our community. And it's not that people committing lower level crimes aren't dangerous to our community, but those people, we can fix that. We can help modify their behavior just by giving them some tools. If we'll just take the time and use some resources to help them along the way. And at the end of the day, how much money that saves for people anyway? How you can actually transform their lives and help transform our community and create a better workforce just by doing the things that really we should have been doing for the past 25 years. I mean, we've we've contributed to this problem by putting pharmaceuticals out there for people to use, knowing for years that they were addictive anyway. And now we want to look at them and say, well, just quit doing it.
Right.
Why, quit breaking into people's houses, quit breaking into people's cars, and quit doing drugs, by gosh. And if not, we're going to send you to prison. And oh, by the way, the longest I can send you to prison is 10 months. So yeah, I've made my community safer for 10 months. Whoop-de-doo.
Yeah.
I haven't done anything to help that individual become a better member of society.
Yeah. Promote change.
Right. And what's interesting is most of these folks want help. They want help when they come into that court. They know that this is a gift, that their other option is prison, and they are willing to put in the work. Doesn't mean they succeed.
Because for a lot of people, seeing you represents rock bottom. And that's the beautiful thing about that opportunity that you have in that room, is to see someone at rock bottom. And no one really knows when rock bottom is until you start going up, right? But so it might be in that courtroom where they're seeing you, they see what my choices brought me here, and depending on what this guy thinks, could represent a whole different life I never had planned. Sitting in a cell somewhere, whatever. Or he's saying, I have an opportunity to make this right. right?
Yeah.
And that rock bottom position says, I'll do whatever it takes to go back up, you know? And I think that's an incredible opportunity to be in front of that. And we, I see that at Celebrate Recovery occasionally. Usually I'm not the one in front of them that's saying, hey, here's your choices or whatever, but we get to see it right after that often, Yeah. And it's seeing someone at rock bottom looking up is the best.
Well, I think it equates to that shame that holds us at times where we are. You follow me? And as you describe your ability to hear people's stories, it's actually offering them freedom to a certain extent from that shame.
Right.
Because I know, even I think the most helpful thing I can do sometimes in people's change is being able to recognize that there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
I would be where you're at
Absolutely.
had I grown up with the same experience, same circumstances, and you're operating perfectly based on that. There's nothing wrong with you. From a human standpoint,
that's a great perspective, Mark. I agree.
I think that's the freedom. The law, freedom, truth, mercy, grace.
Yep.
I can't. You can't unconnect them, and I think there's purpose in that. So, like say, that being said, Jason, I just want to thank you for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me on
behalf of how I see it.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing how you see it.
I was glad to do it.
Any other closing thoughts that you might like to just put out there as I give you just a moment to collect?
I think I'm in a unique position. Obviously, there's only one Superior Court judge in our county, and that's not lost on me. I would just say that I think you show your strength by having grace and mercy more than you show your strength of beating a gavel with a mean look on your face. I try to make sure that everybody that comes into that courtroom, I don't make them more anxious than they already are. I can do my job no matter what it is that I'm doing, whether I'm sending somebody to prison for life, which I've done, or whether I'm sending somebody out the door, telling them to pay a court costs and fine and don't do this again. I can do it with kindness in my heart. And I think that's something that we oftentimes lose sight of for all of us.
Sure.
That, I love that little quote, in a world where you can be anything, be kind. I think we just need to extend kindness. I haven't always done that in my life. I remind myself of that on a daily basis to be kind. And I think it's important. I think it's an important thing. I think it's important in my role as a judge. And I know that sounds, going back to the TV stuff, you see the mean judge and, the hanging judge. I don't have any desire to be known as a mean judge. I want to be known as somebody who was fair and just, and merciful, and somebody who tried to do the right thing. And that's what I strive to do. And I'm going to follow the law doing it.
Yeah. So that's how you see it.
That's how I see it.
Yeah. Anything, Justin? I know that kindness was stirring some stuff in you there. I could see it.
Man, you're fishing it out. No, I was just gonna say, I feel like you said you weren't always like that, and if you hear enough of those stories of the 10-year-old girl, you will transform.
You will.
And I can say that it's true for both Mark and I in being involved in Celebrate Recovery and hearing those stories. And I would encourage those who say, just throw them in jail. Please, go on YouTube, Google Celebrate Recovery Testimony,
Yeah.
and just start watching some.
Yeah.
Just start exposing yourself to these stories. And because we need that kindness, we need that tenderness, that mercy, that grace. And you will never get that sitting on your high horse. You have to be able to get off of it, go alongside these people, hear their stories, go to a local Celebrate Recovery, hear those testimonies that happen every other Friday night. Like, because we're not going to help them by criticizing.
Right.
And by not helping them, we're not helping our community. We're not improving things. So
you don't fix
There you
decades of trauma in 2 days.
Right.
Yeah.
Or 10 months in jail.
Yeah. You just don't fix it.
Right.
You have to help these. You have to give them tools to help these folks. So the next 2 decades can be a hell of a lot better than the previous 2.
Yeah.
No doubt.
I appreciate y'all having me.
Yeah, we didn't even get to that topic of truth, but know that I got your comment there that you want us to deal with that.
We're scared of it.
No, we're not scared of it because we can share how we see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe that's for another time.
It is for another time.
Excellent.
But thank you, and that's how we see it.
Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like How I See It, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one.